It's 7:39. Well, it's the one I'll be asking on A Question of Sport in years to come. The boat race 2012. What happened next?
That might be a swimmer, maybe.
The boat race has come to an end.
No, it's a swimmer.
All the Cambridge men are in.
No, it's a swimmer. No, so it's maybe a protester.
It's an outside agency. Both crews have got their hands up. This is a sensational happening.
Well, Sir Matthew Pinsent, as it happened, called it right. A protester, Trenton Oldfield, a 35-year-old Australian, was fished from the Thames after disrupting the race in what he said was a protest against elitism and government cuts. He was then sentenced to 6 months in Wormwood Scrubs for causing a public nuisance, the judge describing his behaviour as disproportionate and dangerous and saying he'd shown no remorse for his actions.
Futile, deluded and narcissistic. That's what some critics called the protest. Supporters praised it as timely and symbolic and condemned the sentence as heavy-handed. Last week, Trenton Oldfield was freed on electronic tag after serving 7 weeks of that 6-month sentence. I asked him why the boat race was his target. Just to let you know, about halfway through, we've replaced a swear word with a beep.
The boat race was chosen for a number of reasons. One of them was it's 18 people on a closed river. No workers would be affected. No people would lose their salaries, etc. by this protest. It would have very limited impact. It was on a very, very small group of people, but in a very profound and symbolic way.
So do you believe it's in some ways symbolises the elite, it symbolised the ruling class, it symbolised privilege, it symbolised the lack of equality? But what about those people who'd worked hard, who'd trained hard for that day? Do you in any way, is there any part of you that feels that you owe them an apology?
I don't owe them an apology, but I have a lot of sympathy for their training. I do. But I'd also like to make the point that huge numbers of people in Britain and around the world have tried to build lives that are being destroyed by government policies. And I wonder if you ask this question to the politicians, all these people that have trained hard to kind of build a life that expected certain things, some kind of stability that doesn't exist anymore.
How do you want our system to run then? What system of government do you want? If you could wave your magic wand and have a new society with a new political system, where's your model across the world?
This is, I think, what the difficulty that we have in Britain is that we assume that this is, the status quo. What I'm interested in is going beyond that, looking at the cultural ideas that we have in our society.
Can you point to anywhere in the world that you think that's better than here? Where is it?
That's not my interest. My interest is looking at the broader philosophical ideas underneath our society.
But politics has to be practical. So where in the world, where have they got it right?
I've said it again, Nicky. This is not about trying to create comparisons between. And I know this is, it's a long tradition in Britain to kind of say, look at us, ours is better than anywhere else.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the ball is in your court. Where in the world, in this magnificently huge planet of ours with the billions of people, are they getting it more right than we are?
If you really want to push me on this, I think you should look at the indigenous populations around the world.
Which indigenous populations? Where?
All around the world. Their systems have been very successful.
Tell us about these systems.
I don't really get your line of question.
Oh, you're saying you said specifically they had systems amongst indigenous populations. Yeah. I'm really interested in hearing from you about these systems and how we might be able to apply them here in a post-status quo situation.
I'm not really interested in this.
Why not? I'm interested in what might make things better and where it's better.
I can tell you how things will be better in this country, and what we need to do is undertake a whole program of stop criminalising protests, right. Look at how our culture exists. Why is it in Britain that we do this? Why is it that we're in this situation? What philosophical processes can we go through to understand why our culture is like this?
Mm. And where are the indigenous populations you speak about? Are you talking about Aboriginals? You talk about Native Americans? Are you talking about Inca populations in South America? Have they got a better system of equality? And if so, explain what that is and how it works. Please. Why have you gone silent? Okay, let's talk about the criminalisation of protest.
Okay.
And just on your actions on your blog, Trenton, you suggested ways people can protest: workers setting off fire alarms in their offices, plumbers sabotaging conservative think tanks. And you say in it, if you have a tow truck company, can you park in front of Nick Clegg or David Cameron's driveway accidentally? Could you tow their car away? Do you think there is an appetite for this?
I think people wake up every morning in Britain and they know the situation. And people, because of the long history of protesters being criminalised and abused and jailed and people sticking their head above the parapet, having it metaphorically or in real chopped off, people are very afraid here to participate in sort of large actions. People have been brutalised at protests. So what I was trying to do with those points that you've drawn out is draw some attention to the kind of methodologies that were used by the colonial subjects previously around the world, of how they ended up slowly but steadily undermining British imperialism. It's personal power. It's not power where you have to potentially go to jail or put yourself in great danger, but it's a slow process of undermining the system.
And if we compare the kind of protest and possibility of protest in other countries, I know you don't like comparisons with other countries, but if you want to protest here, you think that's being severely challenged and curtailed. But I'm thinking about other countries in the world where people would say, well, look at the Middle East, look at China. In comparison to that, it's still preferable to be a protester here, isn't it?
I really can't draw that sort of conclusion. I mean, I did a list this morning of this kind of beliefs that people have of themselves in Britain, of kind of sort of measuring stick of civilization, etc. Yeah. And I can do things like the extrajudicial murders publicised last week in Northern Ireland that the British government was involved with, English police that are prepared to marry protesters, have children with them undercover. Huge amount of ASBOs that are given to people around the country where families and communities are criminalised. The corruption of institutions where energy prices have gone up 50%. The fixing of interest rates.
Are we one of the worst countries in the world when it comes to freedom then?
I would imagine that there's a big problem here, and the biggest problem is the belief of the establishment that there isn't a problem.
One solicitor said after your sentence, the judge has sentenced on her view that this protest against prejudice amounted to prejudice. By that rationale, the protests at cricket matches in the 70s against apartheid were equally prejudiced. This sentence can only undermine dissent. What do you make of that?
I think that was a very keen observation of the situation. I mean, it was hard not to burst out laughing in the courtroom when the judge was reading her summary of my, political sentence of 6 months in jail.
Why didn't you appeal?
First of all, I didn't believe in the case, the charge that was given to me. I had no choice. I had to go through the process. And an appeal would be sort of suggesting that I still believed in the system and that the system could address it. And in a way, you kind of take your hat and you sort of ask, people for their forgiveness or something. And I wasn't prepared to do that.
Mm. Would you do it again?
Yes.
You have absolutely no regrets?
No, not one. Not a single regret.
Well, there we are. And we're going to be discussing protest later on your call, talking about the right to protest. Is it being undermined in this country? How free are we? And I think global comparisons are perhaps relevant. 85058. Any thoughts, please feel free.